part of the Earglue Media family of podcast.
You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 279, Master and Apprentice. Tonight, we will be diving into the recent novel by, at least in my mind, the undisputed queen of Star Wars novels, Miss Claudia Gray, and breaking it down for you all. And to help me do this is our very own regent. I'm speaking of the one, the only Jedi Master Jonesy. Jonesy, welcome to the show, and thank you for bringing the Holocron of Prophecies with you tonight.
Hey, I appreciate you bringing the death sticks.
That was good. We didn't rehearse that. That's a good one. I like that one. Yeah, we got a death sticks reference in here, which I got real giddy about when I heard it.
Two of them, actually. Yeah.
There was something else he was smoking. I don't know, crack, cocaine. I don't know what it was, something like that. But we'll get to that here in just a little bit. We've got, let's jump into the news because we've got a lot to talk about with Master and Apprentice here. So starting off, Bob Iger has confirmed that Benioff and Weiss are the next two, or I should say, their vision, their Star Wars trilogy is the first one that we're going to get out of the gate. So this is what you had mentioned. I think, was it the last show that we just talked about this?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And well, it's kind of weird, the timing with this you've got in here as Game of Thrones Backlash. And yeah, I don't know another way to say that, but that's been kind of brutal lately.
It has. And there's a lot of reasoning going out there about whether it's the writing fault for Game of Thrones or if it's HBO's fault for cutting the season short and they're having to end it prematurely, which we do see quite often. But yeah, the fan reaction from the Game of Thrones lately has been very, very challenging, and it's bled directly over into Star Wars, to where a lot of people who were pretty genuinely excited for a while, especially the way that Game of Thrones got off to a pretty good start. I think I was calling it hot, and now it's like on fire, quite literally. It's a difference a few days makes in the world of anything Star Wars related, it seems.
That's crazy. Yeah, that's true. It probably is kind of getting to the dumpster fire level at this point. But, so you guys probably know, if you listen to the show, I don't watch Game of Thrones. I think I saw the first or second season, maybe first and a half. That's about it. And I've just never gone back due to time. And I really enjoyed the show. I really did sincerely enjoyed the show. Just haven't gone back and watched it. But I know a lot of people that have watched it. They continue to watch it. My brother Will, who he's been on The Basement, and he was with us over at Celebration this just several weeks ago here. He's an avid fan of it, and he's about as gung ho as you could be before the show, and he is so upset. Like, he's one of the dissenters right now about just upset the fact that he feels like they have really tried to give a lot of shock value and try to turn this ship a totally different way than a lot of people were expecting it, that kind of thing. And it's very reminiscent of, I don't want to bring this up, but it's very reminiscent of like The Last Jedi and what some of the fans went through with that. And we didn't get what we expected. And we're in that moment right now where everybody's very emotional, right? And right. I think over time, this thing will calm down, and hopefully they'll be able to put all this behind them. I don't know. I can't speak for it, but it seems unfortunate that something like this is going to ruin, 7 years that people have invested in their lives so far.
Yeah. Disappointing potential finish. I mean, they've still got one episode left. It'll be out by the time this episode comes out. I hope everybody is pleased with how it ends, however it might end. Again, I'm not in the loop with it either as much, but it's difficult to watch someone or a franchise, if you want to call it that, that's really done pretty well, and it seemingly fall apart towards the end.
Yeah, and and here's my take on, to bring it back to Star Wars. I get it, and I understand it, and I've been through it with other shows and that kind of thing, but I don't know that personally I would put too much faith in the fact that, because this is going to be indicative of where this trilogy is going to go. I think with Star Wars, it is a different breed. And I mean, you can make the argument both ways with The Last Jedi or any other movie that in the Star Wars saga that you weren't happy with. But I don't know. I'm pretty positive about it still. I still think they're going to do a great job. And I don't know that this is really, it's not apples to apples, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right.
I think it's apples and oranges or apples and apricots, whatever. But all right, well, let's move on from there and talk about John Williams. He's recently scored, 25 minutes?
Yeah, 25 minutes of score for Rise of Skywalker, which is really exciting to hear about because this means the finishing touches are starting to get onto, get applied to the movie. We're getting cuts of all the scenes, and John Williams is starting to get an idea of the tone and the narrative of the story, and he's starting to write music and seems energized about it. So this is really exciting news to start to learn about.
Yeah. I wish they would have like a counter on StarWars.com so that you could just see it running like he's now up to 37 minutes and he's at 2 hours or whatever. It'd be really neat to kind of just see that.
Nice little progress bar.
Yeah, progress bar. Complete. Soundtrack's complete, that kind of thing. But anyways, I'm being silly. Dooku Jedi Lost, which is something we're going to be talking about here in about 2 weeks from now. We'll get to more on why in just a little bit here. But they, and this is, so happy. I am so happy. Is it Amazon France had a sneak peek or somehow it got leaked and it's still out there. I checked it just now, but it's showing that we can expect Dooku Jedi Lost in book form coming October 3rd.
That's interesting. I mean, we've talked about this a handful of times. It's a 6-ish hour book. So it's going to be or 6-ish hour audio book. So I imagine it's going to be a fairly short
thin book.
Yeah. Well, comparatively at the very least. For folks like you who prefer to have it in hand and be able to thumb through it, for me, I like seeing how they spell characters' names and location names.
Yep.
That's the most frustrating thing part about an audiobook is that you don't always quite know how to spell these things. And if you're trying to write show notes, folks, that becomes a little frustrating if you're a little anal retentive like I am at times with spelling and grammar. But yeah, this is kind of cool to see that we're going to get it in physical form so you can have something on the shelf. I hope this turns out to be real, but it's Amazon. Everything's real.
Everything's real and it's on the internet. So,
but it's only Amazon France. That's the weird part. It's never not anywhere else, and they haven't corrected it.
Brush up on my French. I'm more excited about it because we'll get to this when we talk about the show in a couple of weeks here, or we talk about the audiobook in about 2 weeks. There are a lot of references in there that are Legends, EU, Old Republic references, that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of them that I believe and they may be new, but I cannot recall. There's just so much. The whole Legends and Old Republic stuff is just huge. It's massive. It's expansive in terms of the number of characters and places and all that. And they just drop names in that audio drama like left and right. And some of them I'm picking up on, right? But some of them I'm not. And I'm thinking, okay, either I don't remember what it is or this is a new reference. And I really feel like I need this book just to be able to go do the research and see where they're pulling from and what's changed and what's not. So I'm super excited about this when it comes out on October 3rd. I've taken my own notes, but to your point, like, I don't know if I spelled it right correctly or not. And so then I go into Wikipedia, type it in, look like an idiot because it's like coming up with no results. So I'm sure I'm doing something wrong and I'm just not, it's lost in translation, if you will. So I can't wait for them. Media preview of Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland. Did you get a chance to look at this?
Very briefly. The title said we're going to be blown away.
Yeah.
But, the feedback's been pretty positive, and they said they got a nice little, surprises and little nuggets here and there. So generally speaking, this is going to be great, right?
I think it is. It has to be. Yeah. And this article that you linked, the thing that just stunned me was that photo, that very first photo that they have. They released that photo of the Millennium Falcon sitting there, and it just looks almost like, there's still rafters and stuff that you can tell it's still under construction, but it looks like something out of a set from a movie. Right. And I guess I should have expected this, but finally seeing it like this, and of course they've touched it up a little bit. You can tell they've, enhanced the lighting in the background, and they've gone for really, really dramatic kind of exposure here, but it looks really great. If this is indicative of what the park is going to be like throughout as you're walking through it, wow, just get out of here. It's just, I don't even know what to think.
Well, and this is why they're going to have to limit people just trolling around there, soliciting around.
Yeah.
Because people just want to be in this world and be in this galaxy and be in this environment and experience it. Even if they don't ride the rides, they just want to experience this is what Disney does well.
Mm-hmm.
They imagine what it would feel like to be there, and then somehow, some way, they bring it to life.
Yeah, it's that immersiveness that I think they've always been known for, right?
It is. I mean, and they do this almost perfect in so many different ways. And I don't want to say they always get it right, but more often than not, they really do get it right. I mean, they did it with Avatar and Pandora over in Animal Kingdom in Florida. And I just expect that they're going to really nail this. And when it opens up really just in a couple of weeks here in May over in California, I think the reviews and the opinions on it, once we get past some of the noise of maybe the rides breaking down and things like that, which do happen.
Yeah.
I think overall the reception is going to be immense and be really, really positive. I'm hopeful. I'm trying not to be a fanboy about it, but I just expect them to really nail this, especially after they get the bugs ironed out after a couple weeks.
Well, I'm excited for everyone that is planning on going, and I am looking forward to living vicariously through all of your adventures there at Galaxy's Edge. So more on that as it continues to develop. And then finally, we are recording this on May 16th. So this will come out obviously a little bit later, but today marks the 8th anniversary of the Cantina Cast. So happy birthday, Cantina Cast.
Happy birthday, Mike. Thanks for 8 years of a great show, and we're happy to be a part of it. Hard to believe it's been 8 years. I'm sure he's, I don't know, he's probably wizened a little bit, maybe not.
Maybe, yeah. Hey, who knows? He's probably having a few beers right now, kicking back. So
he probably is. Yeah. I think his daughter's birthday and all that's coming up. So
yeah.
Happy birthday, Cantina Cast. It's been a wild ride for 8 years and hopefully 8 more years.
Oh, don't get crazy. All right.
Setting expectations early.
Yeah. Setting some pretty heavy expectations. All right. Well, let's get into the novel, our main story for tonight. So again, this is Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray. Novel released was it about a month ago? Maybe ish. Somewhere around there.
Beginning of April, or middle of April, right when we got back from Celebration.
Yeah. So in true form for the Cantina Cast, we are going to spoil the heck out of this novel. So if you've not read it, you might want to just go ahead and turn it off. Or if you are like some of my recent listeners that I've run into, they said, hey, I listened to the show because I don't want to read the novel and I'd rather just hear from you guys what's good and what's not. So this won't be a review per se, and we probably won't break down every single aspect of this novel, although there are a lot of things that we probably could cover, and there's probably it's a well of information that we could pull from going forward. But we are going to try to touch on some of the main plot lines, the threads, obviously the characters, talk about what's new, what's different, what did we learn, what did we like, what did we not like, that kind of thing. So we'll start with the main story synopsis. And so this is set about 8 years before the events of The Phantom Menace. I think I read 7, 8 years. It's somewhere right in there. I didn't really do the math, but Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn and his Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi are dispatched to the isolationist planet of Pijal to help ensure a treaty is signed, which would allow hyperspace travel through the Maw and allow Pijal to be part of the Galactic Senate. And am I saying that right? Because I didn't listen to the audiobook.
They pronounced it as Pijal, but it also depended if you had an English or something near akin to that, they would pronounce it a bit more like what you just did. But Pijal was kind of the basic one.
Thank you. We'll go with Pijal. Along the way, Jin and Kenobi enlist the help of 2 jewel thieves and confront an opposition force attempting to prevent the signing of the treaty, which have shields that lightsabers are unable to penetrate through. They sign this treaty and they meet up with this regent of the planet who just happens to be this maverick Jedi. And is it Rael? Is that how it was pronounced in the audiobook?
Rael Averross.
Rael Averross. He's an old apprentice of Dooku, and for Qui-Gon Jinn, he starts to have these visions of this treaty being signed that kind of end in this bloodshed. So on top of all this, Qui-Gon Jinn is heavily leaning towards he's heavily involved with a very fractured relationship with Obi-Wan Kenobi as his Padawan, and he's just been offered a seat on the Jedi Council, unbeknownst to Obi-Wan Kenobi at the start of the book. So that's kind of the overall story that's going on. And really the book is broken up into, and I want to get your opinion on how Claudia Gray did this, but she broke it up into 3 pieces. Really, it's 2. But there's like the present, which is the main storyline. It's a total of 38 chapters. And then we have 6 chapters that are called Before. And this focuses on the relationship between Qui-Gon Jinn and Dooku. A little bit later, we get some of the relationship between Rael Averross and Qui-Gon Jinn. And then there's one chapter at the very end, which was probably my favorite, I think. But that is really focused on Qui-Gon Jinn's funeral, and at least just before it, with Obi-Wan Kenobi. But did you enjoy the way this was set up? Because it was a nice diversion for me as I was reading the book. It seemed like she had timed it whenever it started to get kind of heavy-handed with some of the, I don't know, just the normal exposition and build up and the character development. This is the break that we got to go back to the before chapters, and it was very refreshing and intriguing for me. But what did you think of it as you listened to it?
I agreed. It was a moment where I liked how she intertwined it because it was relevant with what she brought in with Dooku and with Rael as well. So we got these moments where Qui-Gon and Dooku are early in their apprenticeship, and Rael steps in and becomes a bit of a friend and a mentor and guides Qui-Gon. So we got to see Qui-Gon as a less certain individual and round that character out, but also see how, in particular, the holocron of prophecy played into their relationship. And you can see the parallels a bit, and sometimes the differences between how Dooku and Qui-Gon's relationship was working and how Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan were working later on. And then you constantly have this voice of Rael kind of throughout it just kind of guiding some of these relationships and observing some of the differences and making some commentary along the way. So I thought it actually worked pretty well. I'm usually not a fan of back and forth, but this was a really good balance. And again, it was only about 6 times that they did this.
Yeah.
And it fit really well and it was appropriate. It wasn't as jarring as what we had in like Last Shot, where it was just constantly back and forth. And it was a little more difficult, especially for an audiobook listener, to keep track of which time frame are we in and which characters we're doing what.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's actually one of the questions I was going to ask you. Compared to Last Shot, how did that feel? Because even in Last Shot, as I read that was a lot of jumping back and forth, and I had to put the book down a few times and just say, okay, clear my head and go, okay, where am I right now? Or it took a while before, I realized what timeline I was in. And this one, it was pretty easy to follow. In fact, one of the fun things that I did is after I read the novel, I went back and just read the before chapters, right, one after another, and it's readable. Like it's almost like its own standalone mini story that exists within here, but definitely contributes to the overall storyline of Master and Apprentice, which is kind of cool. So
yeah, and I think that's where Last Shot was challenging, is that you were trying to tell 2 major arcs and still keep them somewhat blended, and that's challenging to do. That's difficult. It's a big ask of the listener, of the reader, in order to follow really 2 different time frames and put them together. And I'm not saying readers aren't able to do that and authors shouldn't challenge us to do some of those things, but this is my preference of how Claudia Gray did it, where you're right. You can follow a general story, but we can enhance it with these other moments by looking back on what the character has already learned and how they might be applying it now.
All right, so before we get into some of the characters, let's talk a little bit about just your overall impressions with the novel. Did you like it? What was the experience like for you? And maybe even compared to some of the more recent novels that we reviewed, and specifically things that Claudia Gray's written in the past.
Yeah, I think it's a very Claudia Gray novel. This is very consistent. I just finally listened to Bloodlines, and
welcome.
That was a fantastic book, and I'm glad I did that relatively recently, because it really prepped me for what to expect here. And what I liked about it, or what was interesting about it, is that the actual story itself, I tended to be less interested in the story because the character moments were so great.
Yeah.
You really got engaged. She really sells you on each of the characters, even the lesser important characters, or the kind of the secondary and tertiary characters that you really don't have to know a lot about, but you still they still play a part and they still fit within the narrative. And those are the moments you just keep craving them. You almost want to skip through some of the exposition of getting everybody where they need to be and figuring out what the problem they have to solve and the mystery and all of the intrigue. And you just want to really see when am I going to get that next tidbit between the characters? And that's something that she really excels at. And that was something when I listened to like Phasma, while there were moments of that, it wasn't as consistent for me going through the entire story, to where each one of those moments really captured my interest and captured my attention. But Claudia Cray's just got a special talent for bringing all of that to the surface every single time the characters engage with one another.
I would agree. And I mean, what better person to write the relationship that a lot of us have been looking to know more about between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn, or even the one that we really didn't know we wanted as much between somebody like Dooku and Qui-Gon Jinn, or even Qui-Gon Jinn and Rael Averross. And that's a whole nother cool dynamic that we're going to get into here in just a little bit. But I think overall, I shouldn't say overall. I know this novel, I really enjoyed it, and I'll get into the why in a little bit, because it's got Star Wars, it's got lightsabers, it's got Qui-Gon, but some of the themes that she was hitting on are what really sold the book for me on a very personal level, and I will get into that in a little bit here. But overall, yes, I truly enjoyed this novel. I think the reviews have been pretty consistent in that most, if not all of them, have said that this novel is good, even great. But I have seen a handful of people that have said that it's not their favorite Claudia Gray novel, or even in their top 5 Star Wars novels in this Disney era. And I can totally see that, because it does at times feel like it does get bogged down. And when the characters aren't interacting with one another, and she's writing about, I don't know, anything else, I guess, and I shouldn't say everything else, but some other parts of the book, it did feel like it was getting kind of slow. And then boom, I'd get hit with these befores, and it was just like, whoa, I'd get reinvigorated by it all. But so yeah, I can see where for some people this isn't their cup of tea. And if you're not a big fan of Count Dooku or Qui-Gon Jinn, I don't know who that is, but there are people out there that are not big fans of those types of characters, or maybe even Obi-Wan Kenobi or this era. I can see where this would be it may not be your cup of tea, so to speak. So, but for me, and here's the one thing that really kind of hit me in the feels a few times, is that it touches on these themes that, to me, both as a father to my children and in my role as a mentor for my scouting unit, particularly around what it means to be like a leader and a mentor, and what comes with that in terms of your expectations from your students, your children, the people around you, with regards to communication, how you express your feelings, how we as leaders and mentors can make some very, very basic mistakes from time to time, consciously or subconsciously, and the repercussions that come from those mistakes. And sometimes we don't realize it. And I think that was what really hit hard. And we kind of see this in the dynamic between all of the masters and apprentices, plural. There are times when throughout the whole book where they're making mistakes, and they seem to not really confront either those feelings, or confront the I guess what's the strife between them, or the lack of communication, or the lack of direction. And they just tend to just brush it off because they need to fall in line, right? They need to just be Jedi and just kind of move past it and move on. And I think that's where it was really hitting for me, that I was like, wow, this is something I deal with constantly in rearing children and rearing students and mentoring folks, and ensuring that, especially when I'm going to steal my thunder a little bit later from right now, but there are times that when we are trying to, especially with boys, right? There's always this thing about, well, boys need to be boys. And we, sometimes as fathers, we can tend to just not really address their feelings, and right or wrong. And in part for me, it's because that's how my father was. And I kept seeing that here. It's a pattern, right? It's the pattern of Dooku never really sat down and spoke to Qui-Gon about how to confront his feelings and how to deal with anger and that kind of thing. And Qui-Gon passed that down to Obi-Wan Kenobi. And then when you get to Anakin Skywalker, here's Anakin, who's just full of emotion, full of anger. And he's got Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan's just doing what he was taught, right? He's not really, there's only that one particular moment at the very end in Revenge of the Sith that he finally says and acknowledges, hey, you're a great person, and I really love you, and I really appreciate you. But prior to that, I always got the impression that was just not something they did, right? And part of it is part of it it's their personalities, but I think part of it is also the Jedi Order itself, right? In ensuring that feelings like that aren't expressed, right? That they don't have those personal attachments and that kind of thing. So for me, that's a lot to say, but that's where this book really kind of hit home for me.
Well, I think there's another theme with Rael and being overprotective of young girls.
Mm-hmm.
you and I are fathers of young ladies. And this is something that is very natural. And when you have tragedy strike, or when something happens, especially if you're really pretty responsible for it, your natural inclination, once you have the opportunity, is to not screw that up again and to go overboard with it. And what are the ramifications of when you do that? I mean, we hear lots of stories. I was overprotective of my kid, and what do? They rebel in a certain way, and they go over the top.
Yeah.
And we see some pretty similar, vibes happen from Fanry in this. But so I think it's another interesting take. We don't have as much of the lore and the knowledge and the really kind of the baggage that we have with the rest of the Jedi. But with Rael, we have an interesting character trying to do the best he can in a number of circumstances, but still failing and having a hard time recognizing what he's really doing. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. But I think, again, kudos to Claudia Gray. It's been a while since we've had a new character that we really got, at least for me, got a bit invested with Rael. He didn't have a huge arc, but an interesting, well-written, challenging character for the characters that we are used to talking about and used to seeing and have an opinion of already.
Yeah. I mean, unexpected was probably a word that I would use to describe Rael Averross.
Right.
But so let's focus first on the familiar characters, the returning characters, right? Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Dooku. And this is kind of what we traditionally do here, but what were some of the things that maybe were confirmed or reaffirmed for you around all three of those guys?
We had, maybe I'll speak for myself. I was curious if Qui-Gon Jinn was really that much of a renegade or a rebel, because quite honestly, we had ideas of it, but we never really had much proof of it. Well, this gave us some of that proof.
Yeah.
That he's been rebelling against the Order for a while. And I think some of that was interesting when we got the flashbacks with Dooku. We did get a little taste that it was, his master was already putting seeds of dissent in some very easy ways, not necessarily doing it intended or in overt ways. But it gave us that idea that he is always thinking in really above what the Jedi Council are, or trying to, what their mandates are, if you want to use the word mandates from the book. And it was good to see that he was willing to stay true to what his beliefs were and his character. And we saw that very evident in Phantom Menace. And we have a very consistent character in that way. Now, he had to go on a bit of a journey to get there, but to see him consistently want to adhere to his value system and what he believed the Force was telling him and his core beliefs was really refreshing, that we didn't see characters really waver off their line, but do so in a very altruistic kind of way, but still follow a path as he starts to unwind what his beliefs really are with the prophecies in particular and how he fits into that story arc.
Yeah, and so agree there. I would say, we always knew he was this follower of the living Force, and he's definitely a devout follower of the living Force. There are a number of instances in here where he just kind of, like you said, goes with the flow, especially at the very end when he finally has his vision, and he has this fight or flight kind of moment, just trying to determine, okay, do I try to intervene here with the vision, or do I allow just the Force to be, the will of the Force to happen and just react in that moment? And, he goes with the latter, and then that's very Qui-Gon Jinn, right? It's very opposite of Anakin Skywalker, which, again, we'll hit on a little bit here too. But I love that we got a very definitive explanation as to why Qui-Gon Jinn believes so much in Anakin as the chosen one. And it goes back to this vision, right? Up until in this story, it starts off with with Qui-Gon Jinn. When you go back to the before chapters, right? Dooku is the one that gets him started on looking at prophecies, and he gets really into it. And then Dooku's also the one that says, you know what, we're done. We've spent too much time on this. We're not going to talk about these anymore. And from that point on, prophecies were still there, but he wasn't the Qui-Gon Jinn that we saw in the Phantom Menace. And it was only because he had a vision himself that he had a revelation of sorts that re-solidified his faith in prophecies. And so when Anakin rolls in the Phantom Menace, it's like he's already in this mindset of he's just waiting for all of this to align. He's waiting for all these things to happen, and that's when it all starts back up for him again. So it was interesting to see that part of it. Now, conversely, the other thing that I found was interesting is there's a line in there when he's talking to Rael Averross, and Rael's talking about the prophecies, or he's talking about he's talking about Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi's relationship, and Obi-Wan is, very different than Qui-Gon, and Qui-Gon's expressing this to Rael, and Rael says, history repeats itself. You were a kid who wanted to do everything by the book until you wound up with a master who thought for himself. Looks like Obi-Wan is on that same road. And so that was interesting too, because I had always just envisioned Qui-Gon Jinn as being this devout living force, a free, will of the force kind of person. And it turns out to be the total opposite. He was more of the Obi-Wan early on. And because of Dooku was able to kind of mold and shape him and put him in and set him down the direction that he's in today. So I thought that was a really interesting take on him that I was not expecting at all. As far as Obi-Wan Kenobi, I think we got pretty much standard Obi-Wan, at least. He's by the book. I mean, there's even in this one too, towards the very end, right? He runs off to the Jedi Order because he's not real happy with how things are going, and goes and basically tells on Qui-Gon Jinn, I guess, if you will. But yeah, I mean, it seems like something that he would do. But
yeah, it was very in line. I mean, he's 17 years old for the most part in this book, right? And he's very much still, you get an idea that he's still a bit uneasy about where he fits. And him and Qui-Gon have had a challenging relationship, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I think some of the things I like, though, is that he still had this mischievous type of side. He was always still had this smile and a grin, and he had a sense of humor, and it always helped liven the mood a bit.
Yeah.
And I was glad to see that still persist. And of course, we got he loves flying, when of course we know he hates flying later on. And we had to tell that story, right? But
yeah,
I like that we did get to see this Obi-Wan that was very relatable still, is very consistent. And again, like you said, when he ran off to the council to kind of tattle on Qui-Gon, it was very much still his mandate type of approach that we got to see in Attack of the Clones in particular towards the end. What would Padme do? She would do her duty, right? And that's exactly what Obi-Wan is that's what his consistent approach is, even throughout this novel, is that they have a job to do, and there is a way to go about doing it. Sometimes he struggles with Qui-Gon's methods because he can't seem to figure them out. And I thought that was a really good dynamic, and it was different than what we had in the Phantom Menace between them, but it helped fill in the gaps of some of their dialogue of what they have, but they weren't in step yet. That's kind of tug of war. Every time we thought we were making some progress, something else would happen that we would take another step back, sometimes 2 steps back.
Yeah. So
I was really glad to see kind of this up and down story and then they finally figure one another out.
Yeah. I want to just quickly go back. I want to hit on this a little bit harder, but because I mentioned it and teased it, but this whole Qui-Gon Jinn, again, he had this vision, and I had mentioned that it's very different than Anakin's vision. They both had visions, but in Anakin, he was trying to control it, right? He had dreams of Padme and dying, and really wanted to control and take control of that in pretty much any way that he could. And for Qui-Gon Jinn, he didn't do that. In fact, just the quote, it says, "Events today would unfold as the Force willed. Qui-Gon could only make himself ready to answer no matter what he might be called to do." And so again, it just speaks to his ultimate trust in the Force and accepting fate to be, to play out however it should. And I think also it speaks to Qui-Gon's, I guess, the light side, right? And there's another great quote later on where he's talking about the light side. Him and Rael are kind of going back and forth on the Chosen One prophecy, but there's it just speaks to how good his heart is, because he knows and believes, I think, that the prophecies really are a path to the dark side, and this is something that Dooku kind of speaks to. Yoda speaks to it. Qui-Gon Jinn speaks to it, to Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? That we kind of hear this 3 or 4 times throughout the novel, that this is a path that leads to the dark side. And Qui-Gon Jinn, even though he probably could have done something to prevent the vision from happening at the very end, he chose not to. One, because he's trusting in the Force, and two, it was the right thing to do. Is he didn't want to go down that path. He didn't want to go take that next step and have it forever control his destiny kind of thing.
Well, I like that we got his reflection at the very end too.
Yeah.
Of it was important for him to misinterpret the vision as well.
Yep.
And I think that speaks to Qui-Gon's intelligence and what he's constantly thinking. He's constantly analyzing and meditating on his experiences, which is, again, very in line with what we would have expected to see. But for him to be able to also recognize his folly in some of this as well, and the true meaning of it was really nice to see. And it really, really rooted him and were to that he is not capable, I guess maybe is the way of turning to the dark side and letting that part of himself dominate. And again, like you said, go to this controlling aspect of the future rather than I'm a conduit for the Force. I'm a conduit for these types of things. And I'm just trying to interpret them. I'm not necessarily trying to influence them.
There was one other thing too. We're kind of mixing both. So we're really right now it's just talking about things that were affirmed, reaffirmed, but we're also kind of touching on things that were revelations for us in terms of these characters. And I think one of the ones that just kind of floored me. There was a moment in there where Qui-Gon goes to visit Rael, and he goes over into his quarters. And he kind of just barges in, right? And because they even make a comment that's just life in the Jedi Temple, that you really don't have any privacy. And so he walks in, and Rael is there with the innkeeper, and it's very obvious of what has just happened between Rael and the innkeeper. And we'll get into Rael and celibacy and his kind of views on that. But Qui-Gon Jinn's kind of basically telling him, "Hey, really, dude, you're doing this, and you're a Jedi, and that kind of thing." And Rael fires back a comment that just floored me because we learned that there's at least one moment where Qui-Gon Jinn wasn't celibate himself, and that he was in love with someone in his past. This is on page 168. So he fell in love with somebody on Felucia, and according to Rael, he said, "On Felucia, you broke the spirit of that law into 12 pieces." So this is something I don't know, and maybe I'm too naive here to think that somebody like Qui-Gon Jinn wouldn't do this, but it was a little shocking to me that this had happened. And he doesn't deny it, right? Qui-Gon Jinn doesn't put up a fight about it at all. And so I would really like to know what this story is. That was like one of the more intriguing pieces of it all that I really wanted to know more. Maybe we'll get it in a short story, or maybe we never will. But it would be interesting to see what tempted and turned Qui-Gon Jinn to love somebody like that. And when Rael says that he broke the law into 12 pieces, like what does that exactly mean? Is it just the law on the surface, or were there other things that Qui-Gon Jinn, did he go even further than he should have in the name of love and in the name of his emotions and feelings, that kind of thing?
Right. And I think that's exactly right. Rael had mentioned when in one of these flashbacks talks about, to use the words in the book, getting laid.
Yeah.
Both in the current as well as in the past, and to a younger Qui-Gon. So we know that he's already had these looser values, if you will, compared to what the Jedi Code strictly mandates. And so, he's lecturing Qui-Gon a bit of the letter of the law, the intent of what the Jedi Code is supposed to be, which is to say, don't form attachments. He's not depriving himself, but he is not forming any kind of attachment, so it won't cloud his judgment. But what Qui-Gon did was absolutely, completely breaking the spirit. When you fall in love, it's very, very different. You get protective. You want to do everything you can in order to not jeopardize the relationship, and including sacrificing your values sometimes. And that's what Rael was trying to say. You can't give me the moral high ground all the time when I know better, because you have completely smashed everything that you say you live for right now. Now, Qui-Gon, to his credit, like you said, did not dispute that and somewhat embraces it. It was a mistake at the time. It was a compromise. But he's learned from it, and he's moved on. Yeah. Now, Rael just kind of wants to throw it in his face. But yeah, it was very good. It would be interesting to see what that relationship was. I got to be honest, I don't know that I'm overly interested in learning all about that. But I get that it's a very important story, probably in his arc of what put him in that position, and then how did he come out of that, and what did he learn, and how quickly did he move more towards this path that we see him on right now.
There was a cool moment in here too with Obi-Wan Kenobi where he was, he conjures up the Guardians of the Will saying that we hear Chirrut say, "I'm one with the Force is with me." I thought that was kind of neat that she was able to kind of weave that in there at some point. But we probably should mention, so Obi-Wan Kenobi, I think he's 13 years old in this novel, at least when it starts off. Well, it's all within a few weeks, but he's only 13, and there's
no, he's 17. He began his apprenticeship at 13.
Yeah, right. Sorry, apprenticeship at 13. Yeah, started at 7. This is 17, and by 24 or whatever, he's in Phantom Menace.
Right.
But there was one thing in here too where we got the sense that, again, that Obi-Wan was a little bit unconventional. He wasn't always by the book. And the one thing that kept sticking in my craw was this whole line when Yoda is talking about Luke and says that he's reckless, and Obi-Wan says, "So was I," if you remember. And I was always at odds with that because I didn't really, I mean, I guess you could make an argument that in, the prequel trilogy and the Clone Wars, we got some maverickness, but I never really felt like he was reckless. And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, but I always just chalked it up to he had a very specific style in terms of his actions and that kind of thing. But I never really saw him as reckless, and that maybe this was a way for this to kind of to make sense finally. That really when Obi-Wan Kenobi tells Yoda, "So was I," that he wasn't talking about what we saw in the prequel trilogy or what we saw in the Clone Wars, but even prior to that, when he was still a Padawan, that there was some recklessness about him, that he was mischievous in a lot of ways. But I don't know. Did you pick up on that at all?
Yeah, a little bit. It was, again, it's difficult to fit exactly what we heard between Yoda and Obi-Wan, but I think we see signs of it, and whether it's reckless or not, that's probably a little overkill on Obi. He's a little overselling it, but I think we see enough of that to where he's bold when he needs to be bold. And when he drops it on Grievous in Revenge of the Sith, you could probably call that pretty foolhardy and a bit reckless abandon, if you will. Yeah. So I think we've seen moments of that. And I think we saw some of it in the Clone Wars too, especially with Satine and what he was willing to do on Mandalore. So I think we've had some moments of it, but I think that also goes with being a Jedi and taking calculated risks, even though they seem to normal people to be way over the top.
Yeah, like jumping from a airspeeder.
Right.
Looking at you, Anakin.
What was interesting though is when the ages of when Obi-Wan was found by the Seekers as well as Rael. Obi-Wan again found it 3 years old, which was old, and Obi-Wan thought that he was one of the oldest to be brought into the temple by that age. But Rael was actually brought in at 5.
Mm-hmm.
And I started questioning, so if Rael was at 5, he'd already been he was from Ringo Venda, I believe.
Yeah.
And really maintained and kept a lot of the customs and the way that they talk. And this, we learned over time that Dooku influenced some of that too, this uniqueness to him, and to, really cultivate that uniqueness and not be afraid of it, which of course is very Dooku with what we'll talk about here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Jedi
it's
Lost.
Like right out of Jedi Lost. Yep.
Yeah. There's a lot of connected tissue between these two stories. But it was interesting to me with all of the challenges that the council had with Rael, with losing his Padawan Nim Piona, as well as his unorthodoxy. And you talk about unorthodox, this guy was just off the charts, and they made a lot of concessions for him over time. And that example right there is what I started to think more of when Qui-Gon brought Anakin before the council. That they would, and I think they even mentioned in this book, they were like, we don't think the council will ever bring in anyone at 5 years old because of all of the challenges that Rael Averross has put us through as the Jedi Council, and all of the differences that all the different experiences and the different challenges that he's presented to them.
Yeah.
And they just won't do that again.
Yeah, that's why I think he's kind of the prototype for Anakin Skywalker, right? In a lot of ways. We touched on the fact that he was a lot older. He was defiant. He was brash, very unconventional. Qui-Gon says he never learned how to control his subconsciousness at any point. He missed his parents, right? He knew who his parents were. He missed them constantly. They made mention of that in the novel. And these are all, again, just hitting on these. I mean, you could, if I didn't tell you this was Rael Averross, you would almost think I'm talking about Anakin Skywalker.
Right.
And yet for all of his faults, the council and even Mace Windu, like you said, they treated him with compassion and made allowances for his behavior. And it felt like they had just had enough of him, and at least this is my interpretation. And given what had happened with his Padawan, that they finally felt like, okay, let's just go stick him somewhere far away on a planet, give him some power as a regent, and he can sit there and mentor this young girl, give him a second chance to wrong the rights or whatever, and really kind of develop this child in the position that he's going to be in, and get him off our back, because he's reckless. I mean, he's, like you said, we joked. I mean, he's out there, he's promiscuous, right? He's smoking death sticks. He's a very talented Jedi. They make mention a number of instances in here where, he's very skilled at his lightsaber. He's an amazing pilot. So by all intents and purposes, this guy's a really good Jedi. He's just not by the book at all. And I feel like he's just a liability. I think they see him as a liability, and they really want to just offload him literally to another planet to get him out of here because of all the stuff, like you said, that he's probably done to them over the years in the past. And this is why there's such a bad taste in the council's mouth when here comes Qui-Gon Jinn back on his old stuff again, right, with the prophecies, and he's towing this like 8-year-old kid saying, no, trust me, this was the guy, this is going to bring this dude, this 8-year-old kid who's way older, is going to be nothing like, Rael Avaros, and he really is a chosen one. You got to believe me. He needs to be a part, he needs to be brought in. And that's why Mace Windu is like, no, sorry, we ain't doing it, right?
Fooled me too many times.
yeah. Shame on me kind of thing. So,
well, it is interesting with the council. I mean, there was a little bit of council bashing again in this book, which I think you and I both had mentioned it as we were walking through the book and then talking through it the last couple of weeks. But this one doesn't make a lot of sense for me with Rael. He was directly responsible for the death of his Padawan, Nimpiona. And in Qui-Gon's eyes, it was very much really just a negligence. And he called it criminal to be reckless with the life of another. Basically, he skirted what was probably the protocol to address a situation. They had a hostage type of situation, and he bypassed protocol because he didn't want to exhibit the patience to do the slicing necessary to access a bridge control or something along those lines.
Yeah, he was supposed to take the protocol was if there was a mutiny, you control the bridge, don't allow anybody in or out, right, and get to safety or whatever else. And Rael decided to not do that. He decided to confront the mutiny head on. So sorry.
Right. No, yeah, thank you for that. And basically his Padawan gets mind controlled, and he has to directly take her out. And the most painful part of the story, this was really kind of a great moment, for as painful as it was, Qui-Gon explains that the look in her eyes is that she knew what was going on. She was still in there, even though she couldn't control what she was doing. She had charged Rael, and he hesitated, but then he made the decision and he struck her down. So what does the council do? They're like, well, yeah, this did not go well. There were a lot of trials, and he was basically, given leniency. So what do they decide to do? Well, hey, we've got another young lady that is just lost everything, and she needs to be tutored so that she can be queen one day. She's like, how old was she? Like 8 years old, 6 years old, something like that. 6 years old, I think. Let's go put him as Lord Regent, effectively the ruler of an entire world, and mentoring a 6-year-old girl for the next 8 years in another palace, in hopes that it would fill that need. And again, feed his pride at the same time. It's like, come on, guys. I mean, where does that make sense at all to do? And it just kind of speaks to the inconsistencies of the Jedi Order with what they think is right and wrong. And again, it speaks to what they were willing to do with Rael, specifically Rael, that they likely wouldn't have done for really any other Jedi in the Order.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like there's making excuses for him. Really. I mean, they're almost apologetic to a great extent with regards to Rael and his actions and what he's brought about. He seems like a super nice, he seems very charismatic, very likable. And maybe that's part of it as well. I mean, it's almost, I don't know. I get what you're saying though. It doesn't really make sense. And I only saw it as, okay, well, it's a second chance for him. And I think maybe to some extent, I think some of the council believed him because, I mean, he went in to kind of play out that whole scenario. His Padawan gets hit with a slicer dart. It controls her mind, even though she's there, she can't control her actions, and she pulls out her lightsaber and is about to attack him. And so it's through defense, I guess, that he ends up killing her. And I think that was the only reason why he was allowed, he was off the hook, so to speak. And
right. He had to weigh the many of the ship against the life of his Padawan.
Right.
That's how Mace explained it to us, and how they justified his actions, that any Jedi would have made the same call, and even Nymphiona would have wanted that type of result.
Right. And
clearly not.
But to your point, I think they're overlooking the root cause here, right? It's not about the actions in that moment. It's what happened prior to that. He was reckless. He decided to go against protocol. He's not by the book. He wants to react. He wanted to fight, right? He didn't want to go and sit there and mess around with controls all day long and secure the what do you call it? Sorry, the
bridge.
Bridge. Thank you. And decided to just take on a fight. And they talk about how there was a number of people that they were fighting that were in the middle of this mutiny kind of thing. So, but anyways, so we're talking about Rael Averross. Some of the other things that really kind of stood out while we're here is I want to go back to that moment where his views on falling in love versus the primal casual needs. And when he's talking about, he basically says love is very dangerous in his view. And I think that certainly aligns with, I think, the core principle of why the Jedi they say no attachments. And I think what's inherently implicit in there is no love and no physical contact or any of that stuff as well. Because what Rael says is, if he has these relationships that are just purely physical, there's no love involved, and that doesn't he says that doesn't compromise my emotions, doesn't divide my loyalties, anything like that. I might have broken the letter of the law, but not the spirit. And again, very, very unconventional. And this is especially one of those moments where I thought, well, I was really not expecting a character like Rael Averross. And I want to throw one just quick thing at you, because it got me thinking, especially towards the very end of this book. And especially after Dooku Jedi Lost as well. We've always said, I don't know if you and I have always said, but I think we've at least talked about in general that had Anakin been mentored by somebody like Qui-Gon Jinn, it'd be a very different Anakin Skywalker, right? Would you agree?
Right. Yep.
So who would have been the better mentor for Anakin? Would it have been Qui-Gon Jinn, or would it have been somebody like Rael Averross?
Yeah, given what we've learned here, where the Padawan tends to rebel against their master and do the opposite, it kind of makes you wonder if Qui-Gon would have been that good of a mentor for him. But I think, man, with Rael, that's a dangerous combination too, because I think with what we saw with Anakin, his willingness to be reckless and willingness to be, overzealous, over enthusiastic about jumping into the fray and just acting on pure emotion, yeah. I think that would have been a very dangerous combination still. So I still will go with Qui-Gon, because even if they would have had a challenging relationship, like somewhat with him and Obi-Wan, I think he would have still been the most likely to make him understand and to realize that. And if Qui-Gon really was in love at one point, what better to understand where he has been at the same time and how he got through it and what it meant for the rest of his life. Yeah,
I would agree too. I have honestly been thinking this about a lot, and who would have been the better master. I think there's a lot that Anakin could learn from both. I think Rael is so very, very close to Anakin in a lot of ways that I don't know that he really would be the better fit. I think Qui-Gon Jinn still would be the better fit for him. But one of the things that, again, and we've touched on it, and I don't know if we've actually explicitly said it, but one of the things that they were hitting on in this novel is that the Padawan tends to go against their master. And so like Obi-Wan went against, Qui-Gon and became more straight and narrow. And Qui-Gon Jinn went against Dooku and became more free-flowing, free-willed, if you will. And so, yeah, if that holds true, and I don't know, I guess you could make an argument that it doesn't always hold true, but if it does,
right,
then yeah, I would say that, somebody like Qui-Gon Jinn is probably still the safer bet here rather than somebody like Rael Averross. Because I think if there were any two people that were going to break that line or break that law, it would probably be pairing up Rael Averross and Anakin Skywalker. I don't know what that would look like, but it would be chaos and mayhem.
Galaxy would be on fire.
Literally just on fire from beginning to end. But I just overall though, I really enjoyed Rael Averross, and I'm so glad that we got him in this book. I'm glad that we got some of him in Dooku Jedi Lost. And I don't want to spoil that just yet, but I really am looking forward to seeing if they're going to be able to do any more with this character. Almost like Infus Nest. I'm kind of in that same, he's right there with me, or with like Infus Nest for me. There's just enough about him that I am super intrigued, and I really want to know more. And I'm just hoping and praying that we'll get something out of him a little bit later.
I agree. Yeah.
And just one last thing. Did you get the one other thing about Rael Averross that I really enjoyed was he felt like the older brother of Qui-Gon Jinn, right?
Yeah.
He'd already gone through everything. He'd already broken every law. Even the way he talked to him when he came in some of the flashbacks when Rael Averross is, he was Jedi Knight at that point. I don't think he was a master. I think he was just a Jedi Knight.
Right.
And he was kind of coming back, and he was on a mission at one point with Qui-Gon Jinn. But just the way he spoke to him was like a little kid brother kind of thing, giving him the head noogies and wet willies and everything else, and just talking down to him sometimes, and really, kind of shorting him and being short with him, that kind of stuff. But I saw that as that relationship, and it's a very cool dynamic, especially again as a father of some sons and myself having a number of brothers. But it was a really neat dynamic, and I would envision that Qui-Gon Jinn looked up to him in that same way. And I think Rael probably looked down to him, Qui-Gon Jinn. And you get that a little bit later, because when they're both adults and meeting up again after a number of years, I mean, because Qui-Gon hadn't really seen him in a few years, at least at the very beginning of the book, he mentions it. It's been a while since he's seen him. But when they start interacting, it is almost like two brothers who may have had a, contentious relationship growing up are back together and paired together, even though there's love and admiration. And it's through Rael Averross why Qui-Gon Jinn is there. He requested him that he come out and help out. But there, you could tell there was still something there, that there was maybe, they had had a very loving but probably contentious relationship growing up together. So,
yeah. And I like the idea that the former Padawans of the same master go back and mentor the new Padawans for the master, and to help them, ease them along whenever they have the opportunity. I think that's a really nice dynamic of being able to pull them along. It's not just the master apprentice relationship. It's how, and what I liked about Qui-Gon had said this too, about that he had figured out how best to serve his master. But I think a lot of that was Rael, of why Qui-Gon was able to adhere so quickly to Dooku's way of doing things, is because of Rael specifically. And Obi-Wan is mentioning this a couple of times. If he would have had someone, Obi-Wan was Qui-Gon's first apprentice, I believe, right?
Yeah.
If somebody else would have been there to help Obi-Wan along, then maybe they would have had a smoother relationship. They would have been able to, move through some of the challenging aspects of it faster. But I thought that was really nice. I do like that. I like the mentorship idea. And I thought Rael really did a great job with it. He was really a pretty good mentor. I thought, he was supportive of him when he needed to be supportive, but also, still gave him the hard time and challenged him along the way as well.
Yeah. Yeah. We find out he taught him how to swim, right? And that was kind of cool, because you're like, oh, okay, Phantom Menace. This is where Qui-Gon learned to swim. It was through Rael Averross. But we haven't really touched on Dooku, and that's probably fair, because even though he is a returning character and he's got some parts in there as far as the befores, he's not really a main character. But any thoughts or notes here around Dooku and what we got from him here?
I think the very first time that we get introduced to Dooku, he is taking Qui-Gon around, showing him around, especially the Jedi Archive. Mm-hmm. And when they come to the Holocron of Prophecy, Qui-Gon says that the look that Dooku gives the Holocron of Prophecy was like someone staring at an enemy.
Yeah.
And it was a very interesting comment, because we've always assumed that Dooku was pretty much into the prophecies as well. Rael, I think Rael introduced them to Qui-Gon, but Dooku really helped him explore them later on.
Yeah.
But it was interesting that this the way that we had thought it played out, Dooku wanted almost nothing to do with it. He'd been there, done that, and really did not want to go back to it. And so there's something there about why did he react that way to it? Was it anger? Was he really just reminiscing, and the urge to go back to it was still strong? Or it just had a lot of questions. It was really loaded, and I wasn't really quite sure how to interpret it.
Yeah, so I know exactly what you're talking about. My interpretation of that scene was, I think at some point Dooku, and I don't know if this is my own headcanon or if there was something in the past in the novel itself, but Dooku at some point was obsessed with the prophecies. And I think, like we said earlier, I think he understands that was a vice for him. And he probably got really close to the dark side, or it spooked him and scared him, right? And so as he saw that, when he was looking at it and thinking, boy, I really don't want to go back to that. I remember, but yeah, it feels really good. I'd really like to know more. Imagine what I could do with it if I could, control or understand these and interpret them, that kind of thing. I think all that went through his head, rushed through his head in that one instant. And like you said, when Rael said, hey, you know what? I got something way cooler that we need to go check out, Qui-Gon Jinn, and he brought back the holocron. Dooku said, you're not going to do this, right? And Qui-Gon was like, okay, that's fine. I'll obey you, and I won't do this so long as I'm your Padawan. And then Dooku responds back, so are you going to do this after you're no longer my Padawan? And he said, yeah, maybe, probably, right? Or some to that effect. And so it was at that point that Dooku was like, okay, fine. And so he goes to bed, Qui-Gon goes to bed, and the very next morning, Dooku's sitting there, I think at the breakfast table or whatever, and he's got the holocron in front of him, and Qui-Gon Jinn walks in, and he's like, I thought you said we weren't going to do this. And he said, you know what? And if you're going to do this, no matter what, then I'm going to show you how to do this, or we're going to do this together, kind of thing, which is a kind of cool take. I think it's actually pretty big of Dooku to do. You have to think there's probably something selfish there in terms of him wanting to break it open. But I almost relate this, and I'm sorry, it's not the best analogy, but it's almost like a gun. Right? Gun control and what you teach kids about guns. It's there. And you can allow a kid to pick up a gun, and they'll probably go, hopefully they'll never go find one. But let's just say they did, right? What would you rather have? Would you rather be there to teach them how to use the gun and understand how dangerous it can be and what it is and why we have them, that kind of thing? Or would you rather let them go figure it out or learn from someone else, right? There's a level of responsibility that comes with something like that. And I think in Dooku's eyes, that's what was happening in that moment, right? He was trying to be responsible and say, let me at least guide him and hope that he doesn't fall into what maybe I almost fell into with regards to the dark side or leaning or towing the line along the dark side because of the prophecies and what's inherent in them. I'd rather do that than, I don't want him to go that route. I'd rather be there for him and guide him, and so that he can make a very natural and safe path and really, enjoy the prophecies, because there's a lot to be enjoyed there. So here's the other thing about Dooku, because we're talking about some of the things that were new, and it's along the same lines here. But I almost got the impression that really it was the prophecy that ultimately led him down the dark side. And shame on me if that hasn't been explicit enough. But again, they went down the path of studying them together, and then Dooku pretty much goes cold turkey on him and says, we're done. We're not talking about these anymore. They're nonsense. And Qui-Gon at that point pretty much got his fill and really didn't come back to them. And we're going to talk a little bit about prophecies a little bit, not in this show, in another show coming up next week. But you get the sense that Qui-Gon at this point, until Phantom Menace, or until his vision, is of the opinion that these prophecies really are, there's a lot left to be interpretation. It's always from somebody's point of view. They're always a stake in the ground in that moment, in the way people try to rationalize current events rather than maybe things that have happened in the past or things that are to come, that kind of thing. So he's kind of downplayed the importance of prophecies until he's hit with this vision of his own at the very end. But anyways, the takeaway here for Dooku, at least, I thought, was it feels like it was through going and reading them again with Qui-Gon Jinn that somehow that got him closer down the dark side path again. And then you add in everything that's going to happen in Jedi Lost, which we'll talk about, and then you insert somebody like Sidious, who is well aware of where Dooku stands in his abilities and his views on the Jedi Order, and he was just ripe for the picking for Sidious at that point to come in, swoop him out, and take him as his apprentice, kind of thing.
Right, and we do get basically a firsthand witness of Dooku's turn as well, and you can't help but assume that the the holocron played a big part in that, or at least it played a considerable role in it to ignite whatever spark was there. And we already know some of the events that we're going to talk about in a couple of weeks are piling on. But at the same time, when he goes, like you said, when he goes cold turkey, all of a sudden now it's like he's read something or he's learned something. And I'm wondering if he just doesn't like it and he needs to go and now he's in this position where he has to go and control and change the future because he doesn't like what he read. And maybe he has had a vision and he has witnessed something that he needs to go and try to change.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's talk about the masters and apprentices, and then we'll get into just quickly on the new characters because we've kind of touched on them already, especially somebody like Rael. But one of the things I thought so interesting enough that Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi, and we've mentioned this, but they had a very fractured beginning. This was not like the rosy start of a relationship that I was expecting. And we got this kind of teased out in the excerpt that was released. So if you read that, this kind of automatically spoiled it. If you didn't, and you've already read this novel, then yeah, this was probably kind of shocking. At least it was for me, because I'd always envisioned that their relationship was, again, roses, rainbows, stars, and roses, and everything was amazing. These guys were always meant to be together, and they really weren't. I mean, they were at odds throughout this novel. There was a level of attention that played out in their relationship from beginning to end, nearly into the very end, that I was not expecting. And it really kind of stems from the fact that it was already contentious to begin with. And then, Qui-Gon Jinn is offered a seat on the council. And that was surprising in itself, because I always got the impression, especially from Obi-Wan Kenobi's line in The Phantom Menace, that, where he says, "Master, if you'd only, listen to the council, you'd be on, you'd be there already," that kind of thing. And we come to find out that he's actually been offered a position. He doesn't tell Obi-Wan Kenobi. And Obi-Wan Kenobi finds out in probably the worst way that you can possibly find out and use of this kind of thing from someone else, just very casually. And there's almost a sense of betrayal there that, right, from Obi-Wan's perspective, that, wow, he doesn't like me. I'm not good enough for him. He's never really liked me. This all makes sense now, right? And you think about this from a 13-year-old or a 17-year-old's perspective, or even, from the last 4 years, and how rocky that relationship's been. To get that kind of news and to be at the age of 17 and to really kind of suddenly make that all, introspective, and it's all about me, right? That's kind of where you go to immediately at that age. And yeah, that just was a wedge that was driven further into the relationship. And you got Qui-Gon Jinn at parts in this book going, yeah, this is probably better, right? I just cut my losses. He's probably better off going with someone else, and maybe I should join the council. Someone will probably be a better master for him, that kind of thing. So they're really in doubt of whether this relationship's ever going to work. And I think they've pretty much hung it up towards the middle of the book. They're both kind of like, we're just going through the motions, and after this mission, things are going to be different. They're almost talking like it's an absolute at that point. So anyways, I'll get your thoughts on that. But that was just really intriguing that relationship was not at all what we saw in The Phantom Menace. Yeah,
it really probably should have split the relationship right off the bat. But what we found, what was really cool, is that we got more moments all of a sudden as they both started to let go and kind of accept, this eventuality.
Yeah, yeah.
They finally got to see the common ground and the things that they were doing well. Some of the blinders had finally come off a little bit, and some of the teaching started making sense. There was one moment where Qui-Gon is always telling Obi-Wan to get into this meditative trance for battle, and you will be pretty much unstoppable, right? And Obi-Wan has had a hard time getting into that. And coupled with that, Qui-Gon never really taught him anything beyond the basic lightsaber cadences. And he always, Obi-Wan internalized that as, I'm not good enough. I'm not doing this or that. And it's kind of this, they're holding me back, type of conversation.
Right. Yeah.
But eventually Qui-Gon comes clean. And this is the communication thing you were talking about earlier. When they're able to finally communicate, they really do fall in line pretty well. And they can really make a great pair when they communicate clearly and they let go of some of the baggage. And that first time that Obi-Wan was actually able to get into a meditative trance during battle, and he was near unstoppable, he was super excited. And Qui-Gon, even though it was a bit boastful and a bit pride, Qui-Gon was like, you know what? No, you've earned this, so claim it. This is a big deal for you. Enjoy it. And Obi-Wan, was able to kind of have that moment for himself. And I thought those were really important moments. And we got more of that, but they were resisting it the entire time. They noticed it, they witnessed it, but then they would regress like, well, no, something else is going to happen, or it just wasn't going to work. And then something else would happen because they're just not in the right frame of mind for this relationship to work in general.
Yeah.
But there were lots of times, there were plenty of examples though, where they were doing really well. Obi-Wan in his ability to research and to read over these things, there was a lot of trust there, and they didn't always recognize that or appreciate that as much as they probably should have.
Yeah. And just to go back to that one part that you were mentioning, because that was a great moment where he said that, Qui-Gon finally explained to him why he never taught him all the fancy schmancy stuff, and that he wanted him just to be a really at the core, very fundamental, good fighter, in that would allow him, free him to be able to do other things, and he didn't have to worry about that was taken care of, right? And so he didn't teach him all the fancy tricks and stuff. But the best part of that moment was at the very, very end, that I think Obi-Wan just sits there for a moment in silence and is kind of reflecting on what Qui-Gon has just said. And the only thing he says back, and I'm going to paraphrase here, he says, "You could have just told me that," right? That's all he wanted. He just wanted the communication to have been there. All Qui-Gon Jinn had to say from the very beginning is, "Look, I'm not teaching you all the fancy tricks because I really want you to be a great fundamental core fighter so that you can continue to take care of yourself and be self-independent and, not have to worry about that. You've got that and taken care of." Had Qui-Gon Jinn just said that, there would have never been the animosity that existed between the two, at least from in that perspective, right? And that hits on the whole communication piece and really being able to kind of speak about your feelings as a mentor. And I think it speaks volumes, right? The whole communication piece, you can look at Rael Everos, Dooku, Anakin Skywalker, Ben Solo. These are all characters that didn't have maybe the right mentors doing the right things with regards to, communicating with them, giving them feedback, giving them positive feedback of that, teaching them how to express and redirect some of their emotions and their anger and all that stuff. And that's really what the whole premise, I think a lot of the premise that I really grasped onto in this book with Master and Apprentice is really those relationships and the mentorships that exist, and some of the faults that were very apparent in a lot of these relationships. There's actually one other too. It's very subtle, but Fanry points out to Rael that it's very similar in tone and theme, but she says, "You protected me when you should have taught me. You talked at me when you should have listened to me," right? So again, this is stuff that scares the bejesus out of me as a dad, because I always find myself in this mode, right? Am I teaching, or am I really just protecting them? Am I doing it for them, or am I giving them enough rope to allow them to do it themselves, right? Am I talking to them, or am I listening to them? And a lot of times when I start getting very emotional, I find I'm doing way more talking than I probably should just do listening. And my kids shut down, and then we walk away and there's no communication, and, it builds up over time. And so anyways, this is all just me getting my therapy out. So
it touched me in the same way, because my wife has started doing this with my 9-year-old daughter. They go out to breakfast on Saturday mornings. And she was telling me this past week. My wife, Leslie, was like, the first time we didn't really know what to talk about. The second time we had a little more prepared. The third time, my daughter came with the subjects ready to talk about what she was interested in talking with her about one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
And it just goes to show you, when you build these behaviors and you build the habits, those types of things become simpler to do. You've created the opportunity, and we all learn that the opportunity is there, and we start coming prepared, and you start to develop that trust. And without that trust, you can't have that conversation at any point, when it won't mean as much. So I think you're right on the money, man. That's where you've got to do those, especially when you're in these mentorship roles and these master type of roles for the Jedi. That they are, like you've said countless times, they are best friend. They are father figures. They are, presumably mother figures, and a number of other ways you can look at it. They have a core responsibility to prepare these young people for everything that they're going to experience throughout life, and to completely shun some of these really basic behaviors and needs really can set you up for really difficult times later on.
Let's talk about the new characters quickly here. So we had Rahara Wick and Pax Marifer. We probably should mention them. They're actually pretty essential to the book. Rahara is a former Zerka slave who freed herself and escaped, and then later on in the novel, she's captured, and they identify her face and they put her back into the program, if you will, as a slave. And there's a whole subplot where they've got to free her and rescue her, that kind of thing. But and then Pax, which I thought was interesting because I didn't really like this character at first, but as he went on, and it didn't take long, but right after they mentioned that he was on a ship. He went as a kid, he was on a ship, he went and hid, everybody else was slaughtered, and the only thing he was left with were a bunch of protocol droids, like 3PO units. And so he was raised by C-3PO units, basically, which I think is hilarious, because when you look at it, I guess through that lens, and you look at his lines and the way he speaks, it's almost like C-3PO is in this novel with a lot of attitude and more emotion and feeling, if that's even possible. So anyways, both of those characters are jewel thieves, and they're kind of essential to the book because two things. One, they're how Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi are able to kind of do a lot of the detective work to try to find out why someone is trying to stop the treaty from being signed, which we really haven't even hit on the story much.
No, right.
I just thought about that. I was like, wow, we haven't even talked about the story. But that's kind of why they're there. But the other thing I think that plays into it is there's a moment in there where Qui-Gon is kind of sizing them up, if you will, with the Force, and he senses that they're good people, and so that's why he enlists them to help them on this mission. And I think this is kind of Claudia Gray's way of kind of poking at the whole, another pathetic life form, and how Qui-Gon Jinn just seems to be going around and picking up people and really not, and just trusting the Force. And this is, again, playing into this same thing. This is it's a pattern with Qui-Gon Jinn, right? He tends to find people, see into them, and see that they're good-hearted people and bring them along to help them with his cause, even though, from the outside looking in, it looks like he really is just picking up the worst of the worst, and trusting in people. Like Padme says, you're really going to trust your, the fate in of this little 8-year-old boy kind of thing. And it just speaks to Qui-Gon Jinn's trust in the Force itself. But what else did you have for, I guess, either Pax or Rahara here?
They were basically their mode of transportation around everywhere.
Taxi, they're the Ubers, the Lyfts at the time.
Yeah, but I like that it did give us a very personal approach to the slavery topic and what it means, and the kind of the scars that it leaves you, and the type of environments that this corporation really did. They had these folks, basically a mining company that owns, contracts across the galaxy. They might have predated the Republic, is how ingrained they are. And they have these contracts. And while slavery is illegal in the Republic, it's legal in these contracts. These are basically started off as more like a penal type of system. And so the only people doing the work, or this hard labor, are the people who have done something wrong. But then their children are born into this, and they are owned. Their children's children are born to this, and they're owned forever, in perpetual. And so it's just this idea that this is okay because even the Republic presumably is doing business with Zerka Corporation.
Yeah, it didn't seem to mind much, did they?
No, I mean, it seemed like a matter of convenience, and it was just foreborn. It was just a way it was. And again, when something has been so ingrained, and this is where it really helped get the story of where we see the disagreements, and really how the Jedi and the Republic in particular, really feed off of each other, but also sometimes have a disconnect, but you have a complication of your moral and ethical values, and helped Qui-Gon's become more and more clear. And again, more that disconnection with the dissonance with the council itself. But yeah, this was a great opportunity. And again, it gives a lot of insight onto Qui-Gon, because he was teaching Obi-Wan at the same time, saying people can be better than their worst deeds. And again, this is kind of the second chance type of theme, but also conversely, how he was going to, how he held Rael accountable with never assume that your friends are above wrongdoing.
Mm-hmm.
These are good lessons, right? Of sometimes people are doing things to get by, but that doesn't necessarily make them bad people. And if you give them that opportunity, they might surprise you. And so it's an interesting dichotomy of when should you believe someone's true colors and when should you look past that? And Qui-Gon even admits he doesn't have the ability to look into someone's soul. He just seems to be a good judge of character. Maybe Anakin might be an exception there, but I mean, generally speaking, he seems to have a really good judge of character. And I thought these are good characters to help bring that out of him, even if they're, a bit on the sideline of sorts and kind of helping move the plot forward a little bit.
So going back to the storyline, right? So Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi are over here. They go to Pijal. I say that right?
Pijal.
They go to Pijal, and there is a young princess named Fanry who is going to be coronated in just a few days. And so we'll talk about her character a little bit here, because ultimately the person that's behind everything that's going on is actually Fanry. And so this was a surprise for me. I would admit, I didn't see this one coming. I had my money on Caddy, that little servant girl, that little like mousy
Katie,
girl that never said anything. I really thought that was like she was behind it, or in some way, right? And it turns out that she was in cahoots with Fanry, but it was Fanry who was the one that was really trying to stop the signing of the treaty, because essentially the treaty would allow her to become the queen, or I guess, but she really didn't have any control, right? She was going
to be a constitutional monarch instead of an absolute monarch.
There you go. Yep. And so I don't know that they really explained it, but she just didn't. It was basically a power thing. She didn't want that. For generations before her, these women and men that were in power there in that kingdom had ultimate and absolute power, and she wanted that as well. This is almost like Game of Thrones all over again. But yeah. So anyways, I didn't see her come in. I think she was a pretty good character. She didn't do a whole lot. It reminded me of like Enfys Nest, right? A very unsuspecting kind of person that turns out to be, a young meek girl under the surface. Turns out to be kind of like, a badass, if you will, right? And that's kind of what she was playing here. But yeah, and again, we talked about Fanry also being a kind of a second chance, and Qui-Gon Jinn makes a comment. And he says, "You think that if you succeed with Fanry, it'll make up for what happened with Nim." And so, yeah, she does kind of fit into this role of where she's now a second chance for Rael Averross to kind of make amends and do better and really mentor and bring somebody up. And I think we touched on the poignant quote there where, the entire time Rael really felt Rael cares for her. I mean, you get the sense that he really did care for her, almost like a daughter, and was trying to raise her and try to do right by her. But given what she said and how she's feeling, he wasn't, he didn't always take the right approach. He wasn't really listening to her. He was basically just talking to her and telling her that this is what you need to do and this is how you need to do it. And she didn't like that. And I think that's why she's rebelling. And she rebelled in probably the worst way and kind of overthrowing the treaty. And, they killed that poor little, or stabbed that Sky person during the coronation, right? So the vision that plays out, she ends up stabbing somebody.
Basically the priest, effectively.
Yeah, the poor little priest guy. But
I have to admit, when she turned out to be the architect of everything that was going on, the now Queen Fanry, I got a little pissed, because I don't like it when books tell me, or they set a character up and then they do a complete flip. And you're like, where did this all come from? I finished the book, enjoyed it, right? Finished the audiobook. When I went through and I was kind of cherry picking the main arcs I had made some notes on, I was very pleased that I was very, very wrong with how this was set up. All of the moments that we got with Fanry, they were in there, and she didn't cheat us out of this. She didn't lie. So Claudia Gray didn't lie to us as she was writing the book. And that was so important. And I didn't quite remember it, when you're reading through it, because like you said, it was a bit of a surprise. But when I actually went back into it, it actually does feed it. You see the signs of it throughout that. And if you're really keen on it, I'm sure some people picked up on that really well, because they're much better at the stuff than I am. Yeah. But yeah, and when I listened to it again, though, it was all there. And sure, the voice acting that Jonathan Davis may have done may have been a touch misleading at time, but I think that's interpretation. But the story didn't lie to you. And I thought that was very important and well written, that the signs were all there. The signs were all there for Rael. And if he would have just stopped and listened, and the monologue that she gave him, if any of those things would have happened, if he would have taken a moment, he would have recognized it. And this could have ended very differently. You're right. This became a power grab type of thing for her, but it was all born out of wanting to regain control for her people and to stop the coercion and the influence that the Zerka Corporation and their slavery has on this planet. I truly believe that at some point it was really that altruistic and it was really that pure. But over time, she was like, nope, these guys have to die.
Yeah.
I'm not really paraphrasing. Like, these guys have to die. It will be war. I want war. Then it had gone too far. But at any point, had he been able to stop and witness what was going on and teach, this could have been avoided.
Oh, yeah. So, and you're hitting on the next thing that I wrote down here was going back to that relationship. She tells Rael, it was never for me. She says it was for Nim. Everything you did was for her. You never stopped to ask yourself if the things a wounded child might have needed were the things that a future queen would need. And this is where then she goes into that line of, you protected me when you should have taught me. You talked to me when you should have listened to me. So yeah, I mean, you're 100% right. That's the Rael, and the signs are there. Like the only sign that I wrote down where I was like, oh, I should have saw this coming, was when there was actually an attempt on her life and a slicer dart was used. And I think I don't remember if it's Rael or Qui-Gon who makes the comment right at the very end that really that whoever did this picked the slicer dart to kind of send a message to Rael Averross personally. So you got to think, who would even know about this, right? You got to think it would be anybody on the council, and you could speculate, okay, maybe it's there, and it's probably some character that will be introduced a little bit later. But the only other person that would have known this information would be the one person that you would expect Rael to confide in with something like that, and that would be Fanry. Like, he probably told her exactly what had happened, and yet she's using this. It's like plain sight, hiding right there, sending him a message of what's going on, and yet he was, too blind to see it, kind of thing.
Who do you think planted the dart when you first read that? Did you have anybody that popped in your head that was like, oh, they're messing with them?
It was, so Caddy was on my short list of people, but Caddy was there like in that scene. And so I was like, okay, that doesn't make sense that she would have done it. But I was still convinced throughout the novels that it was her. The only other one that was really suspect, and I didn't write the guy's name down, I forget now, the general, the super loyal one.
Right.
Because I thought, well, that would be a true 180 because I was really convinced that this guy was not it. And then I got to the point where I was like, okay, well, then he's probably the most obvious because he is just so dedicated to the queen.
I thought Dooku might work into the story in that way. Of course, it didn't come true at all, but I had an idea. Yeah. I thought there was something there that this was like a potential, turning path. And we got a little shake of that at the end.
One last quick thing, and I know we're coming up on an hour and a half here, but the colon crystals. Let's talk about that just very quickly here, because they do play an important part in here. And so, for those of you who haven't read the novel, the colon crystal is this new kind of crystal that they find. They mention that it's rarer than kyber crystals. It's orange in color. But probably the more interesting aspect is that there's a moment in here where Obi-Wan Kenobi's lightsaber is jeopardized, and we won't get into the whys, but somehow they remove the blue crystal out of his lightsaber and they replace it with one of these orange colon crystals, and it actually works. Like, the lightsaber still ignites, and there's a moment at the very end where there is a shield made of colon, and he's able to. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, colon.
Okay. Yep. I started thinking colon. All right. Where he ends up attacking, or he strikes
Darren.
Yeah. Thank you. And hurts him, but doesn't necessarily cut through him or kill him. But so that's intriguing in itself. But then, if you've had a chance to see the special cover of Master and Apprentice, not the traditional one, but the one they did at Star Wars Celebration that I could never get my hands on. There is there's a moment in here, and there's a whole battle we've not really even touched on, where Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi are fighting these people who have these shields that are orange in color, and you come to find out that this colon is able to kind of make a force field that negates the properties of a lightsaber, meaning basically that it deflects lightsaber blades. which was eye-opening for me because I thought, okay, here we go, Yuzhan Vong once again, or we're going down this path.
Right.
But it turns out that if you've got a colon crystal and a lightsaber, then it's just kind of like slicing through butter, right? You can't have both. So there's an out here, and there's a way that the Jedi could get past this if anybody was to weaponize these in some way. So
it was almost like, so the colon crystals had less power to them, which made it more permeable. Like they would offset each other. You could get in there, but the overpowered lightsaber would somehow deflect and actually knock the saber back, like you were hitting taking a hammer to a trampoline.
Right. And the other important thing it does is it sets up one of the prophecies, which we'll get into in the next episode. But there is a prophecy that's written about this, and I think it's the Kyber that's not Kyber is what is part of what that prophecy speaks to. So right. we'll touch a little bit more on this, and we'll come back to it when we get there. So we don't need to spend too much time here on this one, but and then we probably should just mention very quickly, this book is very heavy on the prophecies, and there are a number of prophecies that are laid out. I posted one on Instagram that I felt was really kind of speaking to Princess Leia. And here I am 2 weeks later, and I'm really starting to have second thoughts about whether it is Princess Leia. But we'll get into all those a little bit more. But there's some really, really great stuff here that I think we're going to be able to dig into and speculate on and kind of have some fun with in the next episode as we kind of break down those prophecies. And because, again, it does play a huge role not only in the relationship between Dooku and Qui-Gon Jinn, but then obviously Qui-Gon Jinn and to some extent Obi-Wan Kenobi, and obviously with the vision that Qui-Gon Jinn has and how all that kind of plays out at the very end of this novel.
Yeah, it really speaks to the idealism of the Jedi as well, and what matters most. Is it adhering to the Force or doing what's right? Or you have the way that the visions and the way that prophecies really play into that, and how you interpret that with your core values is really an interesting discussion.
So I had this question as kind of last to wrap up here. Who is the book about?
Ooh, that's a good question. I tend to think it was still about Qui-Gon Jinn.
Yeah.
I think this is very much a Qui-Gon book.
Yeah, and I threw that out there because there were times where I was like, oh, this is about Obi-Wan, and oh no, this is about, the prophecies, and no, this is about Dooku, and it's about, it kind of jumped around, but I'm with you. I think overall,
it's about relationships though, too, right? I mean, but I think, Qui-Gon was definitely front and center.
Yeah.
Is this the Qui-Gon book you wanted?
I would say if I didn't have like the comic and some of the other stuff that we've recently gotten, whether it's, the Clone War episode or episodes, I should say, I'd throw the comic book in there. Maybe I even throw in the Master and Apprentice short story that Claudia Gray did in From a Certain Point of View. I would say there's probably something missing, but I think there was enough here that I really felt like I got a really good sense of who Qui-Gon Jinn is now. I don't have, it's not as nebulous as it used to be, especially coming off at the very end of episode 1, right? We're in a very, very different state with Qui-Gon Jinn. I think there's still a lot of story that can be told with him. I mentioned that whole love interest on Felucia, that kind of thing, but the relationship between Dooku and Qui-Gon Jinn is probably still something that's intriguing to me. I'd want to know more there. And what that was like, but yeah, I think it was the novel I was hoping to get.
I agree.
How about you? Yeah,
this is pretty good. It's pretty solid. It doesn't fill all the blanks in. It doesn't tell you everywhere he's been, but you get enough to know where he's at in the story with the flashbacks, while also you get to see the pivotal moment where things change for him. And so I think this was a very good, focused, localized story. And I think this is definitely the story that we've always wanted to hear about Obi-Wan in some regards, but specifically to Qui-Gon Jinn, and understand what made him almost this zealot for the prophecy. Right. And this really does, it puts it right in front of you, and it gives you a lot of great insight into how it happens.
Yeah. I guess final thoughts and maybe thoughts on Claudia Gray's work and writing. I mean, is she the best Star Wars writer that we have right now?
Well, I'll attack that one first. Yes, I think she is the best Star Wars writer we have right now, just period. Mm-hmm. Even with Timothy Zahn's great, but I think just her writing style works for me. And I think so it's more of a personal call than anything else. She really can write the characters that we know and love and write them very, very well and bring to life other characters and have them interact and give us things that we never knew we wanted out of some of these characters or never knew that we wanted to learn about them. Some of her writing style does get a little bit more into how we speak, especially some of the language that's running into the Star Wars books these days and the way that they phrase certain things.
Yeah.
But overall, that's all kind of ancillary to me. The relationships are what matter most. And she's really knocking those out of the park.
Yeah.
Before I get to my next point, what do you think about Claudia Gray?
Oh yeah, I would 100% agree. I think it's all about the relationship with her. I think a lot of it is at times the dialogue. I think she does a really good job there, even though, yes, I would agree. Sometimes like seeing the word laid twice in this novel was a little like what? And then I think she's used hell a few times in that. These are all minor things. Like you said, I don't dwell on them, trust me, at all. But it's very different. And maybe that's just Star Wars now, right? And I'll probably be fine with it here. I won't even give it a second thought here very soon. But yeah, I think she's probably the best writer we have. She's probably the most accessible writer that we have for Star Wars. When to jump ahead to like Dooku, Jedi Lost, like that one, if you're not up on your Star Wars lore, I really question whether or not that's going to be as accessible to you or not, because they drop a lot of stuff in there that you're like, what are you talking about? Right? For the casual Star Wars fan, that's maybe not the novel you want to pick up or the audiobook you'd want to pick up. Whereas something like this, even though you may not all know all the intricacies, it's fundamentally rooted in relationships and you're able to relate to those on a very personal level. And I think anytime a writer can do that, I think you've got a very successful book on your hand.
So I want to talk about Jonathan Davis briefly, because we do like in the audiobooks, I do like to speak to the narrators, and usually it's Mark Thompson and we just gush over Mark Thompson. It's been a while since I've heard Jonathan Davis read a book, probably since Revenge of the Sith, and he knocked it out of the park. His Qui-Gon was really good. His Obi-Wan was exceptionally good. His Dooku sounded like Dooku. I mean, it was an interpretation, but it very much was in character, which I think is in a couple of weeks when we talk about Dooku Jedi Lost, you and I have some comments in that regard. But this felt like Dooku. His Rail, you and I think last week you had said Rail when you heard him in the Dooku audiobook, maybe didn't quite line up with what you had.
But I had Sam Elliott in my head.
Right, so you had a little gruffer. Yeah. But yeah, I think even still, it gave him still this kind of Western type of vibe.
Mm-hmm.
And it really worked. And the characterizations of all of the characters really were very good. And none of them were over the top. His shrills are a little weird with some of the screaming. Don't really work for me, but I got to be honest. I just hear Qui-Gon talking in my head all the time now. And I just want to talk like Qui-Gon Jinn and like Liam Neeson all the time. And it was very, very good. And these folks all do a fantastic job. But I was really excited that Jonathan Davis had another opportunity, because I don't know that Mark Thompson could have done this book as well. I think these characters and these voices really fit Jonathan Davis very, very well. So if you're on the fence about burning an Audible credit, I can't recommend it highly enough. Please go burn a credit on this book. It's worth listening to it. It's good.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll leave this here for now, and we will pick this up on the next episode. But before we do, we got a couple shout outs.
Yeah, we do. We got a new review on iTunes from our friend Matthew Clark. I always count our 5-star look no further for Star Wars coverage. I can always count on these guys for weekly news, theories, analysis, and lighthearted discussion. Thank you for making 1 to 2 hours. Mike is regarding that 2 hours of work each week endurable. Also, shout out to my guy, Wedge Antilles. Can't argue with Wedge, but thanks for the review, Matthew. Really appreciate that. It's kind of you.
Yeah, if I had an air horn, I'd do the bah-bah for Wedge Antilles, but we don't have that because we don't do that. But
Mike would do that anytime we get over an hour and a half. So he's like, time to wrap it up,
boys. Wrap it up, yep. We've got some new Discord members. Chunky Wookie and Brentley Ellenberg has returned to Discord. So welcome back and welcome to Discord. Thanks for being there, guys. Hopefully you've found your place there and have jumped in on some of the crazy conversations that tend to happen nearly every day. All right. Well, with that, I think we'll end it here. Next week, we're going to come back and do a show on visions and prophecies. So we'll be diving into some of the specific prophecies that are spoken and in the Master and Apprentice novel, but we'll kind of mix in some of the other prophecies that we've known through Star Wars and really kind of have some fun with trying to tie those back into what were they thinking? Is it something that's happened in the past? Is it something that's happened in that moment? Or in the sake, or in the, I guess to speak to the rise of Skywalker, is it something that may yet happen? We'll find out in the next episode. So last thoughts before we go. Anything before we go?
Live in the now, my friend.
Yep, live in the now. All right, we will see you guys next week.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.